Welcome back. Today we're going to explore two foundations that I promise will completely change the way you read the Qur'an. The first one is that the Qur'an actually explains itself. It does this through parallel verses and all these different ways of saying things. And the second big idea? The Qur'an is the final book, for sure, but it didn't just appear out of nowhere. It came at the very end of a long, long history of divine guidance. All right, so let's jump right in with something that I think a lot of us notice when we first really start reading the Qur'an. You see certain themes pop up again and again, right? Tawheed, the hereafter, guidance, warnings, stories of the prophets, all these moral teachings. And it's easy to wonder, wait, is this just repetition?
But here's the thing, and this is what we're going to cover today. This is actually a deliberate teaching style. We're going to look at how the Qur'an explains itself, where it fits in the whole history of guidance, the context that really gives it meaning, and then finally, how these two big ideas, these two foundations, can bring a whole new level of clarity to your reading.
So, right off the bat, here's the crucial point. The Qur'an itself is telling us this isn't just repetition. No, this is a very deliberate method. It's a divine teaching style.
And this verse, wow, it reveals something so profound. It says the Qur'an is a book where the different parts actually support one another. The message comes back to you again and again, but each time it's from a new angle with a new emphasis, bringing you even more clarity.
The Qur'an actually has a word for this style. It's called tasrīf. Think of it like this. It means to circulate something or to present it in different forms over and over so that the idea becomes really deeply understood and sticks in your memory. Allah tells us He's presented things in the Qur'an in all these diverse ways for a reason, so that we might actually take heed.
Okay, so that leads us right into our first big foundation, and you'll see how this all connects. The Qur'an is its own structural guide. In other words, it explains itself.
Now, this next verse is incredibly important for anyone studying the Qur'an. It tells us that revelation has these two distinct dimensions. It's really a remarkable description from Allah Himself about how the structure of revelation works. So, on one hand, you've got what's called ihkam. These are the concise, really solid verses that are just packed with meaning. And then, on the other hand, you have tafsil, and that is the detailed explanation, the expansion of those concise verses. And where do you find it? Often, right there in the Qur'an itself, just in different passages.
So what does this mean for you when you're reading? Well, when you come across a verse that feels a bit short or really dense, or maybe just difficult to understand, the key is you're not supposed to just isolate it. The whole idea is that you're meant to search for its explanation somewhere else within the Qur'an. And this is exactly why the scholars came up with that famous principle, the Qur'an explains itself.
And this perfectly captures the experience of so many people who seriously study the Qur'an. There's a major scholar, Imam Amin Ahsan Islahi, who explained it beautifully. He said a topic can show up in lots of different surahs, but it's never ever just meaningless repetition. Why? Because the context is different, the audience is different, the purpose is different. And he even said, speaking from his own personal experience, that when he faced difficulties in understanding the Qur'an, the greatest help he ever got was from the Qur'an itself.
So this all leads to a really essential habit that every single student of the Qur'an should develop. When you hit a point where something seems unclear, the first thing to do is just pause. Don't rush it, don't try to force an interpretation. Then ask yourself a question. Where else does the Qur'an talk about this theme? And finally, you search, where else in the Qur'an is this specific word used? Or where else is this kind of situation described?
Because that so-called repetition isn't repetition at all. When the Qur'an comes back to an idea, it's almost always doing something specific. It might be adding some context that was missing before, or maybe it's specifying something that was said in a general way. Sometimes it's correcting a potential misunderstanding, or even completing an argument. Or it could be shifting the entire focus, say from a warning to a message of hope, or from a point of law to the wisdom behind it. So, to sum up that first foundation, let the Qur'an be your number one teacher. Simple as that. Now, let's move on to the second foundation. This one is all about protecting you from reading the Qur'an as if it exists in a total vacuum, completely isolated from history.
So yes, the Qur'an is the final book, but it's so important to remember that it's not the first time Allah sent guidance to humanity. If you look at it from the Quranic worldview, it's a long story. When Allah created us, He put a kind of inner compass inside every human being. And then, right from the earliest times, He started sending guidance through prophets. This was a continuous chain, generation after generation, and it all culminated in the final revelation.
And the Qur'an is very clear about its relationship with the revelations that came before. It says it was revealed in truth, confirming what came before it of the scripture and as a guardian over it. I mean, that one single verse, it establishes a massive principle for how we should understand this.
So the Qur'an isn't disconnected from what came before. It's described with two key terms here. First, it's musaddiqan. This means it confirms the original truth that's found within the earlier scriptures. And second, it's muhaiminan. This means it acts as a protector, a criterion, a guardian that corrects any distortions that may have crept in over time.
Okay, so the Qur'an is the final message, but it's a part of this long, continuous history of guidance. And because of that, there are actually three things that come before the Qur'an that we have to keep in mind. They form the essential background we need to understand it properly.
So what are these three things that came before? First, there's our innate guidance, what's called the fitrah. That's the moral compass Allah put inside every one of us. Second is the Abrahamic tradition, the Sunnah. And third are the scriptures of the earlier prophets, the Torah, the Gospel, and so on, which still preserve a great deal of divine wisdom.
And this isn't just theory, it's extremely practical. Let's take that first one, innate guidance. This connects directly to what the Qur'an calls ma'ruf and munkar. Ma'ruf is basically what our sound human nature already knows is good. And munkar is what it recognizes as evil. The Qur'an isn't starting from scratch. It's appealing to something we already have inside us. It actually builds religious law right on top of these shared moral foundations. Okay, and the second thing that came before the Qur'an, that's the Sunnah, the living, breathing tradition of the Abrahamic religion. Now, why does this matter so much? Because a lot of our core acts of worship, think about it, prayer, fasting, zakah, hajj, they weren't just invented from nothing when the Qur'an was revealed. They already existed as part of an inherited religious tradition. What the final revelation did was correct them and purify them.
All right, let's bring all of this together now. To really, truly understand the Qur'an on a deeper level, you need two things working at the same time. Think of them as two foundations that give you a clear path to understanding.
On one hand, you have to read the Quran from within, letting it explain itself, using one part to understand another. But at the same time, you have to read the Quran within its historical context. And when you do both, you protect yourself from two really common mistakes, two extremes. You avoid reading verses in total isolation, and you avoid forcing foreign meanings onto the Quran that just don't belong there.
So as we wrap up, here are the key takeaways to hold on to. Remember these foundations. The Quran's parts resemble each other, and they reinforce each other. Its message is presented in all these different ways so that our hearts will remember. Its verses were first made solid and firm, and then they were explained in detail. And finally, it came to confirm the guidance that was already there and to act as a guardian over it.
You know, if you can make these principles a real habit, I guarantee your study of the Quran will become so much more stable, coherent, and just spiritually nourishing. I really hope you'll join us for the next lesson as we continue to build on these foundations, all so that you can read the Quran with the clarity and reverence it deserves.